Good afternoon, readers, and welcome to day 2 of the Victober Poetry Challenge. So this is a challenge that I have invented for myself, where for the 14 days that I'm in self-isolation, I'm going to read one poem from this Victorian poetry anthology, and we are going to discuss it and talk about it in the comments. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of you amazing people who actually, took me at my word and apparently kind of sat down and worked out what you thought of the poem and told me about it in the comments yesterday on Hiram Powers' Greek Slave by Elizabeth Barrett Browning from 1850. That was a real treat. I really enjoyed the comments to that, and I hope that will continue throughout the next few weeks. So Victober overall is Victorian October, and it is hosted by Katie at Books and Things, Kate Howe, and Lucy the Reader. And this Victorian Poetry Challenge thing was roughly inspired by Matthew at Maybury Book Club's Norton Anthology poetry reading thing that he did at the start of the year. I don't know whether the Norton Anthology actually is a mixture of poetry and prose, but anyway, I will link to those people and videos down in the description so that you can check them out as well. And today we have got a real treat. I'm really excited for the poem today. So after I filmed the video yesterday, I told my husband what I'm doing, and he made some comment like, "Oh, you're really giving, I'm picking a poem." I told him I'm picking a poem at 4:30, then I'm reading it, making some thoughts about it, and then I'm filming a video about it, and the whole thing's going to take within half an hour. He's like, "You're really giving these poems the academic and intellectual attention that they deserve." I was like, okay, that's fair enough. So I picked the next poem that evening. So I read it last night and I read it again this morning, and I love it more every time I read it. So I'm excited to read it again. So yesterday I said that I thought this poetry anthology was arranged alphabetically because it started with Thomas Babington and then it went to Elizabeth Barrett Browning. So Babington, Barrett, it looked like there was a sequence there, but I must be wrong somehow because the next poet that we have got is Alfred Lord Tennyson, and he is the quintessential Victorian poet. So this guy was born in 1809, so he lived basically the length of the 19th century because he died in the 1890s, which we're going to be talking about in a sec. And yeah, he became poet laureate in 1850, so for the majority of the Victorian time, he is the king poet of Victorian literature, and he really covers it all. In some places he is quite subversive, but he also talks a lot about things that Victorians were obsessed with. He talks about militarism and things like the charge of the Light Brigade and the kind of the pros and cons of that, I suppose. He talks about the Victorian obsession with medieval things, so he does some retellings of some Arthurian legends in poetry form. He tried to write some plays which were apparently less successful, never heard of really, seen any of them being performed recently. And he also had a real thing for writing about death, dying, and grief and grieving. So one of his most extended works that is quite well known is In Memoriam A.H.H., which he wrote after the death of a very close friend and supporter. I don't know exactly what their relationship was, but somebody who was very dear to him, and he wrote this very extended poem about his grief that I have read only some of, which one of my ambitions is to one day finish that poem. So I think when you come to reading Tennyson, you realise why he was such a well-loved poet. You realise why he's a poet that is still, broadly speaking, known and loved today. I would say that probably anyone who has got a good working knowledge of Victorian poetry will have heard of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, even though I hadn't read anything by her until yesterday, and I don't think she's a particularly well-read poet today. She is a studied poet at times, but she's not necessarily top of the list of favourite poets. Tennyson, I don't think you have to be particularly knowledgeable about Victorians. I don't think you have to be particularly knowledgeable about poetry to have heard of him. I think he's just one of those literary figures that people generally know if they know a little bit about literature. And you can just really see why. So I had a couple more choices with Tennyson because like I said yesterday, I'm just picking the first short poem that I come to. But the first short poem by Tennyson is from 1830, so it's really from the beginning of his time as a poet. And I ruled that one out because it's not technically within the Victorian era. I think it's included in the anthology to give you an idea of like his progression and that his themes as a poet going through his life, but it doesn't really fit with what we're trying to do. Then the next one was called, I think, The Crimson Petal and the White, and I'm pretty sure I read that one last year. And then the next one after that was The Charge of the Light Brigade, and I'm pretty sure I commented on that the year before, so I wanted to rule out poems that are familiar to me, because I thought, like, part of the point of this challenge is to push me to read something new. So yeah, I skipped ahead, and the last poem in the collection, and apparently one that he asked to always be put at the end of any collection of his poems, is called Crossing the Bar. And yesterday I read the little explanatory paragraph before I read the poem. I'm not going to do that today because I want you to think about the poem as you hear it for the first time, and then I might go back and read that depending on how I feel. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me, and may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark, and may there be no sadness or farewell when I embark. For though from out our bourne of time and place the flood may bear me far, I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. I love it. I just love it. I think it's going to be hard. I know it's only day 2 and I shouldn't like jump ahead of the game, but I think it's going to be hard to hit a poem that speaks to me so strongly through the rest of this challenge. So the first time I read it, I was really just skimming through the options, and I kind of read part of it and I was like, oh, Victorian Navy, naval images, yeah, that's a Victorian thing. And then I moved on to the next one, and it wasn't until I came back and read it again that it really hit me what he's talking about. And that is one of the things I love about a poem like this. This is like a poetry gold for me, because it's a really strong, really clear metaphor that works in and of itself, and also very, very clearly invokes the thing that the poet is trying to get you to think about, which in this case is death. And Tennyson is talking about and writing about his hopes for death and dying, and what he wants his deathbed to be like, and using a metaphor of putting out to sea to marry him with that. And that is just such a perfect image to fit with that theme. So according to, I'm not going to read it all because it is a little bit long, but according to the explanatory paragraph, he actually wrote this poem in 20 minutes whilst he was sailing over the Solent in October 1989. So we're also in October, autumnal mood for a slightly autumnal theme, and this was while he was living on the Isle of Wight. So he was sailing across a short stretch of the sea to go home, basically. And it's 1889, so he is approximately 80 years old, 79 or 80 or 81, roughly that kind of age. So he's an old man at this stage. You can't really say that he isn't. He's 3 years away from his death, and yeah, he's thinking about the end of his life. And presumably by this time he's got some experience. We know, we've already talked about in memoriam AAH, he's had some significant griefs in his life, and he's like, at the time death wasn't always something that was entirely predictable, but there was like an ideal deathbed image that you'll see replicated in Victorian literature, where like people will gather around the bedside and they will hear like the dying person will be able to say their last things and so on. And he's kind of speaking to that and speaking to his own version of that. And I think it fits really well with, so recently I did the deathbed tag that was created by Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse and Lukash at Totally Pretentious, and it's something that we still think about. And I was thinking that the poem that we read yesterday, it would be fair to say that it was in a way fairly topical, but this poem is timeless. This is not a question that people ever stop having, that kind of wondering of what is it going to be like for me, and are things going to be arranged in the way that I would like them to be? And just like a hope for the best. And this is what he's doing, really. So he's invoking these two beautiful images of the end of the day and the start of a journey on the boat. And so you've got sunset and evening star, twilight and evening bell. So just bringing together those images of the sunset and the fall of night, and marrying them up with the very sensory experience, I suppose, of being on a ship. So a clear call, a moaning of the bar, and the description words the description of the movement of the tide, and you can hear it and you can almost smell it. You get this really evocative feeling of being on one of a traditional wooden ship that might have its little creaks and groans, and he uses that to present his ideal image of what it would be. It reminded me, actually, I think Kehar was talking about ASMR rooms where she mentioned one where you can listen to it and it really sounds as though you are in a Victorian ship. So it made me think of that, because this poem kind of gave me that feeling. It just fits so well. So may there be no moaning of the bar, as well as talking about the note says that it thinks it's to do with the low sound of deep waters meeting over a sandbar. Okay. But the moaning is also expressive of the feelings of sickness and pain. He's saying, I hope I don't die in pain. I hope there's not that kind of discomforting noise. But he says one clear call, something, I suppose sudden but foreseeable. He's saying that he wants to know when it's going to happen. And he wants it to be definitive. He doesn't want the doubt. He doesn't want the suspense that presumably he's seen people go through. He doesn't want the pain. And he also says, may there be no sadness of farewell. He doesn't want the mourning. He doesn't want the grief. He almost is rejecting that idealised deathbed scene that I mentioned before with all the people gathered around his bed space. He's almost saying, I want to go on my own, and then I want to, like he says, I want to meet my pilot face to face. I want to be aware of what happens, and I want to see what happens next. And it's slightly bittersweet, because you know that he knows that that's probably not going to happen, and you know that he knows he's asking for too much there. The set of things that he wants to be around for the moment of his, the time of his death, it's unrealistic and it's unattainable, but it's fair to hope for. And I suppose you can hope for some of those things to happen, even if not all of them do. I really like the idea of the ocean as representing the place we come from and go to. So that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. So this idea that he doesn't know where he came from, and he doesn't also know where he's going to. Another thing it says in the explanatory paragraph is that he's characteristically, however, Tennyson remains guarded about precisely what awaits the soul. The poem is inconclusive about modes of existence beyond the grave. He doesn't definitively say that he's going to God and heaven. He doesn't make that kind of assumption. He just kind of says that he wants to know. He's kind of curious. It's like he interprets it as a new adventure, which is a nice way of thinking about it, I suppose. And there's almost a quiet confidence to that. I want to meet my pilot face to face. It's if there is a God, I want to be face to face implies a significant level of equality. So I like that as well. That kind of assertion of I want to be able to do that. The tide is moving, seems asleep. I like the way that the sea conveys the emotion as well as the mysteriousness. But I feel like I'm starting to ramble here, so I'm just going to read it one more time, and then I will let you also comment with your thoughts and feelings in response to this poem. What I did yesterday and what I will try to do today is write the words of the poem in the description below, so that you can review it and pick out any bits as well. Sunset and evening star and one clear call for me, and may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark, and may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For though from out our bourne of time and place the flood may bear me far, I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. It's a beautiful poem for a funeral. I guess a funeral, maybe somebody who's agnostic. Anyway, take care. I hope you enjoyed that one as much as I did.